A major shift is underway, and events are moving fast. What we are seeing now could reshape the entire global economy. Donald Trump has increased the pressure, trying to force China and India to sever ties with Russia. But both countries responded clearly. They will not submit to Washington's demands. China, in particular, made it unmistakably clear that it will not abandon Moscow just because America wants it to. With this single step, Beijing has already dealt a serious blow to U.S. strategy, and that is only part of the story. For years, much was said about de-dollarization, the gradual move away from the dollar, but in practice, little was done. BRICS countries did not move as one. Some feared provoking Washington, and India especially long kept the dollar at the center of its trade. That caution has now ended. Under the weight of harsh tariffs and constant attacks from Trump, Delhi realized that partnership with the U.S. no longer provides the stability it once did. In response, India is reopening channels of cooperation with China, shifting the balance inside BRICS. For the first time, the group is acting as a unified bloc. China, India, Russia, Brazil, and more than 20 countries of the global south are pushing a single agenda, reducing dependence on the dollar and building a new financial system. Meanwhile, even close allies such as Canada are beginning to feel the cost of over-reliance on Washington. Canada's Prime Minister can see what happens when a partner's policy becomes unpredictable. This is not just headlines. It is a shift in the foundations of global power. Dollar dominance is weakening, while the countries challenging it are gaining momentum. What we are witnessing is not a carefully crafted plan, but a chain reaction. Under Trump, the U.S. turned tariffs into its main weapon, but instead of exerting precise pressure, they spread like a fire through an entire building. When Washington doubled tariffs on Indian goods, raising them to 50%, it was presented as leverage to force Delhi to abandon cheap Russian oil. In practice, the result was the opposite. The decision rattled markets, caused the rupee to plunge, and pushed Indian policymakers to scramble for workarounds. Why does this matter? Because a falling currency in the middle of a trade war makes imports more expensive, cuts corporate profits, and scares away investors. In India, sentiment has already soured. Traders began betting against the rupee as tariff threats escalated. These are the first warning signs that usually lead to capital flight and stalled new investment. Instead of drawing India closer to the US, the pressure is driving it to seek non-dollar channels and alternative suppliers. And at the top of that list is, of course, China, the exact opposite of what Washington intended. Zooming out, the bigger picture becomes even clearer. Since 2020, confidence in the dollar system has been shaken by asset freezes, sweeping sanctions, and now tariffs against an entire range of partners. When you hit an economy that underpins Asia's supply chains, the shockwaves ripple across the whole region. This is not just pressure on policy, it is the reshaping of trade routes themselves. For India, survival now means maintaining the flow of energy and reducing costs, even if that means paying in currencies other than the dollar. The Indian leadership has learned this lesson quickly. Seeing that Washington acts without regard for Delhi, authorities have begun reducing dollar dependence and increasing the role of the rupee in foreign trade. This is not just a tactical step. It aligns organically with BRICS's plans to create an alternative to the dollar system. And this is only the beginning. If the rupee continues to weaken and oil keeps flowing eastward, the outcome is clear. More and more deals in yuan, dirhams, and rupees, and fewer in dollars. Not because leaders are making speeches about de-dollarization, but because the economy itself drives it. When the balance of costs and benefits shifts, behavior shifts as well. The real question for Washington is whether its pressure is working, and the answer is already evident. Yes, but not for the United States. You cannot pressure India in isolation and expect everything to stay the same. Pressure always opens new corridors, and this time the path leads straight to Beijing. India's trade with China has long been unbalanced. In the 2024 to 2025 fiscal year, the deficit reached nearly $100 billion. Chinese imports rose to $114 billion, while Indian exports to China declined. And these are not trivial items that can be easily replaced in a year. These are industrial fundamentals: electronics, batteries, chemicals, machinery, even pharmaceutical components. If India urgently needs to reduce costs, the cheapest and most accessible factories are still abroad, in China. Delhi has tried to reduce this dependence. Politicians promoted local production and encouraged Western companies to diversify supply chains. Apple's assembly of iPhones in India is often cited as an example, but one project does not change supply chains. It is a complex network of components, equipment, and investments, much of which still comes from China. Even in the years when India reduced overall imports, the flow from China continued to grow. So when Washington raises tariffs on Indian goods while simultaneously threatening China, factories do not stop. They restructure. They purchase more Chinese components, seek alternative payment channels outside the dollar, and pass costs further along the supply chain. This is how de-dollarization happens quietly and in reality. Beijing is more than ready to provide both goods and payment systems. This is not about alliances. It is about supply chain logic. And by that logic, the dollar gradually loses ground. India does not need to publicly declare that it is abandoning the dollar. Its trade flows already show it. The more deals it conducts with China under pressure, the stronger the case for local currencies or payments through third countries. Changes occur not through declarations, but through contracts, invoices, and payments that bypass the dollar. And this is precisely the problem for Washington. If its policy pushes a key partner like India to use yuan-based systems more actively, what happens next? Expand tariffs on everyone and watch who adapts, or observe how its own measures backfire against the United States. This brings us to a broader stage, because behind these trade shifts lies the true focus of Trump's campaign, the struggle over Russia and its energy exports. After imposing 50% tariffs on Indian goods, Delhi began reducing purchases of Russian oil. At first glance, this looks like a US victory, but the picture changes instantly once China enters the game. While India slows down, Beijing moves in the opposite direction. It is purchasing Russian oil in record volumes and making it clear, the United States does not dictate here. This is not just trade, it is about who holds real power in the global economy. Chinese refiners have already booked at least 15 shipments of Russian oil for October to November. These are not small deals. They are major orders from ports that usually served India. In essence, China is taking the very barrels India refused. The result is simple. Russia continues to sell, China gets cheap energy, and the American pressure campaign fails. For the United States, this is a troubling reality. It shows that their ability to dictate terms is waning. Threats no longer inspire fear, and promises no longer instill confidence. The alliance between Beijing and Moscow strikes at the very foundation of American power, the petrodollar system. And if this cooperation deepens further, Washington risks being excluded from the planet's most critical energy flows. The consequences don't stop there. Even America's allies are beginning to feel the effects of this policy. The next clear example is Canada. For decades, Canada relied on its southern neighbor. Energy, metals, automobiles, timber, all flowing directly to the United States. Pipelines, railroads, ports. The entire infrastructure was built for fast delivery to American buyers. This model worked until tariffs, retaliatory measures, and falling demand turned it into a trap. By the second quarter of 2025, Canada's economy had already begun to contract. GDP fell by 1.5% year-on-year, a significant downturn. Consumer spending held up, but business investment collapsed, and exports of automobiles, equipment, and agricultural products dropped sharply. When trade becomes a weapon, even close allies suffer. For Canada, the danger of relying on a single client became obvious. Ottawa is now rushing to diversify supplies, redirecting fuel exports to Asia and other regions. But ports, terminals, and new contracts take years to develop. Until then, weak growth and a fragile currency. Still, changes are underway. Alberta is negotiating with Japanese refiners on a new heavy oil plant, and the LNG Canada project has already begun sending liquefied gas to Asia. At full capacity, it will export up to 14 million tons per year, with expansion already planned. 2 more LNG projects, cedar and wood fiber, are also in progress. Beyond energy, trade connections are also expanding. By mid-2025, the U.S. share of Canadian exports had fallen to 68%, down from nearly 80% just a short while ago. Ottawa is actively promoting deals in Asia through the Pacific Agreement and its Indo-Pacific strategy, focusing on critical minerals, hydrogen, and clean technologies in partnership with Japan, India, and ASEAN countries. Yet diversification is uneven. Canada has already run into friction with China, imposing tariffs on electric vehicles and steel. Beijing responded in kind, with tariffs on Canadian agricultural products. Meanwhile, tension with Washington continued to grow. Trump raised tariffs to 50%. Ottawa temporarily suspended some retaliatory measures and later eliminated the digital services tax entirely, just to resume negotiations. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business is warning of a recession, citing supply chain disruptions and falling investment. Oxford Economics estimates that by year-end, up to 140,000 jobs could be lost, with unemployment rising to 7.5%. Exports to the United States have already fallen by 27% since January, highlighting just how vulnerable Canada has become. Decades of dependence have turned into a burden. Canada sees the old economic model collapsing and is rushing to build a new one. And this is the same reality now confronting India and all other US allies caught in the eye of the tariff storm. To stay updated on these shifts in the global economy, subscribe to the channel and see you in the next episode.